Hi there everyone, it is Press Any Button back with another Unity tutorial, and in this part we're going to be looking at constructing our barriers and how they're going to break down as the game goes on. We're also going to be looking at how we can destroy our enemy units. So this should be good and pretty simple for the most part. So let's jump straight into it by looking at a demo of what we'll be achieving this session. Okay, so now that we've got the game open, let's take a look at some of the things that we've achieved. So we've achieved movement along the x-axis, and we've also achieved the ability to be able to shoot shots and make sure that they're deleted once they leave the scene. Now what I've managed to put together for this session are our barriers. And these are our barriers right here, or bunkers, and you can see them on the left here with our background template that we used earlier. They're pretty similar, and they work in a similar way. So each time I take a shot at one of these, they take a bit of damage. If I take another shot, you can see that this block will turn red. And if I take another shot, you'll be able to see that this part of the bunker has been completely removed from the game view. And if I continue doing that, then we're going to break all of our bunkers down. Now the first thing that you might be thinking is, why do we have barriers that change colour instead of with a pixel-like effect that we see in the original game? And the answer to that is pretty simple. It's just a difference of aesthetics. The core components that go into making these bunkers would pretty much be the same if you were to have them break down like that. The only difference would be that instead of having orange, then red, then nothing, what you would actually use is tiles that look more broken up according to the amount of damage that they've taken. So now that we've got the topic of the barriers out of the way, we just look at our enemy right here, and their behaviour is actually really simple because when we shoot them once, they are removed from the scene. And that's pretty much what we're going to be doing today. So I'll just prepare my workspace so we can get to doing this together. Alright, so I've cleared my hierarchy of all of the things that you won't have yet, so we can start building this game together. So the first thing that we're going to work on is creating our barriers. Now the first thing that we're going to do is go to our hierarchy right here, right click or either click create, and then we're going to go to 3D object and then select quad. Once we've created a quad, what we want to do is we're going to take a texture that we want to be associated with the quad and drag it over the quad. So we're going to switch to our scene view and then go to 3D, and with our quad selected, so right here, we're going to move that up a little bit so it's not overlapping with the player. And then we're going to drag a texture that we've imported into our assets folder for the neutral phase of the barrier onto our tile right here. And now let's just think about some of the things that we can do to really make this texture pop. I've already done this, but to make this texture pop, on shader you want to go to mobile, particles, and then additive. And that's what we're going to use for all of our tiles, so don't forget that. Once we've got that sorted, we can toggle back to our 2D view and take a look at our game so far. And what we want to do with this quad is, we firstly want to rename it so that we've got better organizations. So we could call this something like square tile neutral, just to tell us that this is the neutral phase of our tile. So once we finish with that, we're going to create two more tiles with different textures in the same way. So we're going to go to create, 3D object, quad. And then with this quad, we're going to go back to our 3D view. I don't know why it's back there, but make this 4. Oh, and make sure these are lined up with your player game object on the z-axis. So once we've got our new quad, we want to take our medium state, or the state that you want once it's been shot once, and we're going to drag that onto the quad just as we did before. We're going to position this similarly at 0, 0 on the y-axis, as we should have done with our square tile neutral. So we'll take that to 0 also. And we're going to rename this square tile bad. Then finally we're going to go through the same exact steps but with another tile, and this has got to be the final tile before the object leaves the scene because it's taken too much damage. So we're going to go to create, 3D object, quad, and then take your texture for the really bad state and just drag it over onto that quad and then place it at origin once more. Now we don't need these all in the scene at the same time, and as you can see, once they overlap the colours become a bit muddled up. Firstly, rename this quad, calling it square tile critical, and then we're going to go to our prefabs folder, and as you can see I've already got these prefabs, but it won't hurt making another set. And with our prefabs folder open, we want to drag our quads into here to make more instances of them. And now we've got prefabs for our square tile neutral, bad and critical. With that sorted, we can remove square tile bad and critical from the view by clicking on them and hitting delete. And now we've only got square tile neutral. And what are we going to do with this? Well, we're going to add a new component, and that is going to be a new script. Now the best thing that I can think of to call this script would be barrier neutral, so we'll just do that. And once you've got the name sorted, you want to click create and add. And doing that has provided us with a new empty script. So we want to go back to our assets folder and then double click on that script to open it up in MonoDevelop, or you can open it up here. Anyway, I will see you in MonoDevelop in just a second. Alright, so since I opened up MonoDevelop, I compiled the script from what I'd done in a bit of research just before the lesson, and here is our finished script for our neutral block. Now I'm going to explain what this script actually does, and as you can see it's quite simple. There's not too much going on here, but let me go through and describe it anyway. So we've got our public game object. Now this sets up a reference in the inspector for the game object that we can dump a random game object into, and I want this to be orange. Now the reason I want this to be orange is because we're going to instantiate our orange block, or our square tile bad. So with that being said, let's go further. Now we've got void on trigger enter collider other set up here, and we want the result of that to be that we destroy our bullet and we destroy our game object. Now I've set up some tags in the script, and we're going to return to Unity to see how we can assign those tags to the different game objects. But let's just quickly talk about what these tags are doing. Now as you can see here, I've put return. So if our object that this script is assigned to enters the collider of other objects that have these tags, then we're going to ignore what the rest of the script says, which means that if I have my blocks right next to each other and their colliders touch or enter each other, they're not going to set each other off and start destroying each other. Now this is also the reason why I set a tag up for our boundary, because we're already inside of our boundary while our tiles are. And we don't want them to be set off and destroy the boundary also, because it's going to destroy the other game object. But in the way that I've referenced it right here, it shouldn't actually be possible to destroy our boundary, but we're going to have things happen that we don't want to happen. So we set up a tag for boundary just to ensure that we're not going to go into this part of the script because we're inside of the collider for our boundary. Now that that's sorted, let's take a look at what happens when we want the rest of the script to actually work. So I've set up a tag for our bullet or shot or beam, and I've called that beam right here. So if we have an object outside of our current and that enters the collider of this object and it's tagged with beam, what we're going to do is we're going to instantiate orange, and that is the game object that we've put in the public game object area. And that's going to be instantiated in the same position and in the same rotation as our original object. And we're going to destroy the beam object, because I've referenced it as we've done with our tank shot script, and we're going to destroy the current game object that this script is attached to. So now that we've got that sorted out, let's add all the necessary components in the Unity engine and see how things work out. So we've returned to Unity and we just want to toggle 2D mode right here. And as you can see, our script has been constructed, and hopefully you've saved on your way out of MonoDevelop. Now we're going to drag our script into the scripts folder, and then we're going to click on our square tile neutral game object and take a look at what has changed. So looking in the inspector, we can see that we have an area for our orange game object. Now for me that's quite relevant because I've actually got an orange block, but you might have wanted to call it something different, which you can do in the script. So we need to find the game object that we want to put in this area. So let's go over to our prefabs folder, click again on our game object, and then find that square tile bad, and then just drag it into there. And now would be a good time to take a peek at what we've actually been able to achieve so far. Okay, so we've got the game running here, and I'm just going to fire my first shot. And as intended and as expected, we've instantiated an orange tile from our neutral green tile, and that's what we're going to continue to do. So what's next? Well, let's look at our square tile bad. We want this to turn into another block similar to how we did with our square tile neutral. So we just have to go through the same steps, right? So add component, new script, and then call this barrier bad. Now that we've got that, we can click create and add and open our script as we have done before. So let's go over to the assets folder, and we see that our script is hiding there, so let's just drag this over to our scripts folder, and then once we're in our scripts folder we can open it there. But before we switch over to MonoDevelop, let's make sure that our barrier neutral script is also open, so we can use that to construct this new script. So here we have our barrier bad script, and it's very barren, so all we need to do is select the necessary components, which turns out to be all of the script, hit Ctrl C, click right here, select all that, and then hit Ctrl V. Now what are some things that we need to change? Well, we're going to change the name of the game object that we're going to be adding, because this will just make things a little easier when we're trying to figure out what needs to go where. Now everything can be left as it is, and we can just save our script and then return to Unity and see what happens. Okay, so now that we're in Unity, let's go over to our prefabs folder and find our square tile bad. And we can see that the script has been attached to it appropriately and updated with the area for our game object. And we're going to take square tile critical and drag it right into where it says red. Now let's play our game and see what happens. So this is going to be the first shot, and we've got an orange tile now. And this is going to be our second shot, and now we've got a red tile. And our third shot, well, we haven't set that up yet. So let's go back and set up the script for our third shot. Alright, so now for our third tile, we're not looking for the exact same script, but we're going to need a script nonetheless to destroy our tile completely. So we're going to go to add component, new script, and then we're going to call this script barrier final. And then once you've got that sorted, we can click create and add, and then open up that script in MonoDevelop after we've put it in the appropriate folder. Okay, so now that we're in MonoDevelop, let's do what we've done for our last script and just copy over some things from barrier neutral. Paste them in as we did before. And what we want to get rid of is our public game object right here, because we're not calling a public game object. And we want to remove our instantiate line, because we're not instantiating anything. We are simply destroying everything. Then the final thing that we're going to do is to remove all of these references to our other tags, because we don't need them anymore. And for some reason, having these preemptively deletes the tile from the game. So let's delete these from our script. Then we want to save and return to Unity. Now we don't have anything to do in the inspector, so let's go straight into testing our script. So now I'm going to fire 3 shots, and we're going to look at the behavior of our tile. One shot makes the tile orange, another shot makes the tile red, and a final shot makes the tile disappear. And in all instances of shooting at our tile, our shot also gets deleted from the game. Well, now that we've discovered that our object works correctly in isolation, let's attach some tags so that we don't encounter any problems in the future with any of our tiles colliding with each other. So I'm just going to go to the prefabs folder, and for all instances of my neutral tile, I want to use the green tag. For all instances of my bad tile, I want to set that to orange, and for all instances of my critical tile, I want to set that to red. And let me show you how you can actually add tags to your game. So first, click on any game object, and in the inspector, look for where it says tag. And then on this drop down, what you want to do is go to add tag. And then here we can hit this plus icon and then create any tag that we want. But as you can see, I've already got all of the tags that I need. So I'll just hit that minus icon to get rid of that tag. And then as you saw, to select a tag for an object, all we need to do is go on to the tag drop down and then select it from that drop down. We also want to do the same thing for boundary, so don't forget that. We want to go over to the cube game object, and then we want to select boundary as our tag. Once we've got all of our tags sorted, let's think about scaling down these objects so that they make sense in the scale of the game. So we can remove our current neutral tile from the scene and then go to its prefab, and we're going to scale it down to 0.3 on the X and the Y axis, and we're going to do this for each tile. Once we've done that, we can drag our neutral tile back into the hierarchy and back into the game, and then position it where we want it to be positioned. But wait, these have corners, and if you've been looking in my project folder, you'll see that I do have shapes with corners, and I'll show you how to add them right now. So we want to go to 3D objects, then quad, and then let's toggle the 2D view, find our game object, and we want to drag a texture that is half blank, half colored onto our game object, just as you see right here. So let's do that, and you'll be able to do that using a PNG. And then we want to again make sure that we've got mobile particles additive selected for the shader on the material, because the blank part of the tile will actually be filled up using the dominant color that is present in the texture already. So once we've got that sorted, we can set up our scripts as we've done before. So we can go to, instead of new scripts this time, we can go to scripts, and then because this is a neutral block, because it's green, I'm going to select barrier neutral, and then we can do that for all of our other triangle shapes. And bear in mind, you actually only need a triangle going in a certain direction, because we can change its rotation and everything like that in the inspector, and we don't need other instances like right triangles. So one set of triangles should be fine. Right now I'm not going to do that because I've already got my prefabs set up for those. So what I'm going to do is just delete this from my scene, and then go back to my 2D view and actually remove this temporary background, because we don't need it right now and it's blending with our current tiles. Then we're going to make sure that the X position of our tile is at 0, and then let's move it to about -2 on the Y position. Once we've got that sorted, we can add our left corner prefab, which should have been set up in the same way that we set up our normal tiles. And as you can see, a good distance to have each block away from each other is 0.3 on the axis. That doesn't have to remain the same. We're going to make our Y coordinate -2 again, and as you should be able to see right there, we've got a nice smooth shape. Now this is one of the easier and more relaxed parts of the tutorial. It's a bit like building something in Minecraft or something out of Legos. So I'm just going to show you the final game object, and then we're going to talk about that. Alright, so as you can see right here, I've got my final game object. Now there's one major difference that my game object has right now, and that's the fact that it's actually grouped as an object and not just different blocks. So how can we do this? Well, I'm going to unparent this real quick. And now that I've done that, I've probably got a hierarchy that looks more similar to what you're working with, except that my cubes are cold, because these are the things that I was running in my test. Now the best way to assign a parent and group all of these objects together is to right click and then hit create empty. And because we don't want this game object attached to that cube, let's just undo that. Alright, and then move this cube up again. And then once we've got our empty game object into the scene, let's call it barrier. And then select all of the blocks that have gone into making our barrier shape. And with that sorted, we want to drag them onto barrier. And there we have it, our game object is sorted. If we toggle our arrow there, we can see that all of the blocks belong to this barrier empty game object. And then we're going to make this a prefab by dragging it right down into our prefabs folder. And then we've got multiple instances of this object which we can drag straight into our game. Now there's a couple of things that you can do with the size of your barrier if you're not quite liking it. So you can actually scale it to make it a bit narrower. So if I scale it by say 6 here, then you can see that my barrier is slightly narrower. Bear in mind, the blocks that you instantiate when you're shooting at your barrier will always be at the same size that they were from when you created them as a prefab, so you'll have to manipulate that a little later on. And another thing that I suggest is to take your shot or beam game object and just make that slightly more narrow so that you won't be hitting multiple barrier bricks as you go along. Now the final thing that I promised is that we're going to add an enemy and see how we can destroy that. So we're going to go to our hierarchy, right click again, then 3D object, and then go to quad. And with our quad there, we want to make sure that its transformation is at 4 on the z-axis, and make sure that everything's transformation is at 4 on the z-axis. And then we're going to find a texture for our little invader, so let's go to our 3D view, and then drag that texture right over there. And make sure it's also mobile particles additive. Switch to our 2D view, manipulate the size of it a little bit, change its positioning back to origin, get rid of that main camera icon very quickly, and then scale it down probably by 0.75 on the y-axis, and there you have it, you have your enemy. Then we're going to go to add component, new script, but for me I'm just going to go to add component and then script, and then I'm going to find my enemy destroy script and return to monodevelop. So right here you can see our enemy destroy script, and you can see that it's very similar to what we've done before. And because this object isn't going to be colliding with any barriers, just as we did with the barrier final, we haven't got any other tags except from boundary referenced here and beam referenced here. So to put this script together, what you want to do is just literally go over to barrier final and just paste in the same script. You can even use your barrier final script if you want. And there you have it, you have your script for your enemy, and then hit save if you need to, and then return to Unity. Now that we're back in Unity, I can hit play and we can see what happens when we shoot our enemy. A side note is to always make sure that your main camera is on, because if it's not, then you're not going to be able to see anything. And let's get going. Okay, so here I have my game, and I'm going to shoot one shot that turns it orange, then another shot that turns it red, and a final shot that destroys our tile. And then I'm going to shoot my enemy, and guess what happens? Our enemy is removed, our bullet is removed, and we've finished this part of our Invaders Unity series. I hope you guys enjoyed that part. I hope you learned something. I hope you were able to make use of the information that was here, and I just want to say thank you for all the support. In the next part we're going to focus on enemy movement and animating our enemies, which should be exciting. But as always, this has been Press Any Button, and I will be back another time.